Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you today. I can see Jake, Janelle, Lisa, welcome to the meeting. We are going to give people just another minute to join us. There were about 11 people signed up for this session. So let's just give them a bit of time. And congratulations are in order for some of our attendees. I know that you've heard about the outcomes of the AHE Fellowship EOI. So if you have been successful in securing a faculty-funded place, congratulations to you. And we in the Teaching Academy look forward to supporting you on this journey. So let's get going. We might have a few more people join us, as time ticks on, but let's get going. It's 2 minutes past 10. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kushila Kumar. If I haven't met you before, I'm the director of the Charles Sturt Teaching Academy, and part of my role is to support folks who are applying for Advanced HE Fellowship. I'm joined today by three wonderful colleagues who have been on this journey last year and have recently received their fellowship. So congratulations to Hermie, Brian, and Fiona. They've all been on this journey, and I've invited them along to share their reflections and tips for success with you. So it should be an interesting session where we get to hear a little bit about sort of the background to the application, but also really that authentic lived experience of being on this journey. So let me start by acknowledging country. I acknowledge that I'm joining you in this virtual space from the lands of the Biripi people in Port Macquarie. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all are joining from today. Please use the meeting chat to share the land that you're on and that you're joining this meeting from. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people in this meeting today. So here's a very quick outline of the session. I will take you through a bit of set the scene really for the Advanced HE Fellowship and the frameworks that you need to be engaging with in this space. We will look a little bit at the application and think about some of the tips for developing your application. And then at that point, I will hand on to my guest presenters to reflect on their journey and to share their reflections about tips for success. And then we'll hopefully have about 10 minutes to have a bit of a discussion and Q&A around anything that you want to know more about. So let's move quite quickly on to the professional framework. So Advanced HE and your fellowship application requires you to be engaging with the professional standards framework. The whole application is constructed around the framework, which has professional values, core knowledge, and areas of activity. And for each level of fellowship, you need to be mapping to one of the 4 descriptors depending on your level of fellowship. So essentially what I'm saying here is you need to know this framework inside out. You need to be really familiar with what the professional values are, what the core knowledge is, and what the areas of activity is, because you will need to write against that in your application. So one of the first things that you can do before you even commit pen to paper is to go and download the guidance documents and make sure that you're really engaging with this framework and understanding what those 3 dimensions are. So in all, there are 15 areas that you need to get familiar with, and I will talk a little bit about how you can do the mapping for your level of fellowship. So let's look at the 4 levels of fellowship in turn. I think most people on this call are probably either applying for fellowship or senior fellowship, but I do have all 4 areas on my slides just in case there are folks who are going for associate fellowship or for principal fellowship. So the first level of fellowship is associate fellowship. That's for those who are very new to teaching or for those who are supporting learning but don't have direct teaching responsibilities. So if you fit that criteria, then you need to be looking at descriptor 1. So you need to be thinking about how you talk to the professional values. You need to be thinking about how you apply the core knowledges, how you can demonstrate you apply the core knowledges, and you have to be thinking about your practice in at least 2 of the 5 areas of activity. Now, once again, I don't think there's anyone on this call that I can recall from my notes who is applying for associate fellowship. So I'm going to move very quickly on to the next level of fellowship. But if you do have specific questions or things are not clear, please make sure you reach out to the Teaching Academy and we can support you to just understand how to what level of fellowship is right for you. So fellowship is the next level, and I believe that there are a number of people on this call who will be applying for that level. So a fellowship application roughly is about 3,300 words. It will have a context statement of about roughly 300 words, which is where you kind of introduce yourself, your role, and your context. Now, that does not need to be linked to the professional standards framework. The substantive part of the application, the 3,000 words, is your reflective account of practice, where you need to talk about your practice in relation to those 5 areas of activity that I've got listed on the slide. And you need to be, basically, your application, the bulk of your application will be 5 sections, each speaking to those each area of activity. So A1, A2, A3, A4, and 5. And roughly you're expected to be constructing around 600 words per each of those sections. Then you can talk about, so in each of those areas, you're providing examples of your practice that help the review panel understand how fabulous and effective you are in designing and planning learning, in teaching and supporting learning, in assessing and giving feedback, in supporting and guiding learners. And obviously the 5th one is about how do you demonstrate that you have a commitment to enhancing your own practice through ongoing learning. So this level of fellowship, and if you've already done the fellowship report and you know this is the level of fellowship you're going for, this is for staff who can demonstrate substantive and sustained practice in directly teaching students. So you will be looking at descriptor 2, which means you need to speak to all 5 areas of professional values. You need to address all forms of core knowledge, and you need to talk about your practice in all of those 5 areas of activity. So if you're going for fellowship, once again, it means that you really need to know that professional standards framework inside out, because you're required to map to that and write to that in your fellowship application. Everybody gets up to 500 words for references. And fellows, please note that you will need referee statements, 2 of them, and I'll talk a little bit later about who you can choose to be your referee. Senior fellowship. I believe there are a few people on this call who are looking at senior fellowship, and senior fellowship is very much for people who can show sustained sustained impact on other people over 3 to 5 years of practice. So this is not so much about how you lead and support and teach students. This is about how you lead, support, guide, initiate change, or influence others. So this can be colleagues within the university, obviously your peers. It can be helping people, other staff members, to build their capability through things like mentorship and coaching, for example. So this is very much about the leadership level. And what you need to be helping the panel, the review panel, understand is that you are an effective educational leader, that you influence the practice of other people who teach or support high quality learning. So in this one, you also get a context statement, a short context statement where you talk about yourself and introduce yourself. You get about 2,000 words where you can talk about your reflective account of practice. This must be referenced and mapped to the professional standards framework, and it has to talk about your practice over the last 3 to 5 years. And then on top of that, you get 2 case studies about 2,000 words each, which really give a more in-depth insight into your practice in 2 areas of leadership. So for those people who are going for fellowship, I would be saying to you, think about those 2 case studies now. What are you going to select to constitute your case study, because there's quite a bit of work involved in constructing those case studies and making sure that you have the right level of evidence to include in those case studies. And then very much like the fellows, you have about 500 words for references, and you need supporting statements from 2 referees. And then the final level of fellowship is principal fellowship. And I'm not sure if there's anyone on this call who is going for principal fellowship, but this is for very highly experienced individuals who can show very broad and sustained and, I guess, longitudinal impact over 5 to 7 years. So you can see how each level of fellowship adds more years on, right? So fellow, 3 to 5 years, senior fellow, a little bit more, and principal fellow, you must show that impact over 5 to 7 years. So for anyone going for principal fellowship, the main thing here is to show that you are demonstrating strategic leadership of academic or professional practices and staff, both within and outside of your institution. It's about showing that you can implement effective, inclusive strategies or policies and so forth. So if you are going for principal fellowship, again, a similar format to the application, but obviously you're getting a few more words to play with. So the application will be roughly 7,500 words. So there's a lot more writing to be done and a lot more demonstration of impact to be done. So I'll just talk quickly about who your referees can be, and then we'll stop for a moment to see if there are any questions that people want to just sort of ask about what I've presented so far. So everybody needs referee statements. At the level of principal fellowships, your referees are called advocates. So there's a slight change in terminology, but let's look at the associate fellow, and senior fellow. You need to obviously have supporting statements from referees, and referees are people who are intimately familiar with your practice, whether it's your teaching practice or whether it's your leadership practice. So it should be someone that you have worked with or are working with currently, someone who has a really insightful first-hand knowledge of your practice so that they can endorse that application, they can comment on your application. Those people need to be having current or recent experience of working in higher education. They need to be sort of familiar with the professional standards framework, but it is your job, I think, to partly to help your referees understand what the professional standards framework is. So you will have to do a bit of coaching in that space, but they themselves don't need to have fellowship. So, you could ask an associate head of school, if you have a associate head workforce development, if you have a course coordinator that you're working very closely with. So there's a range of people that you can be asking to provide a reference. And at principal fellowship, there are some more nuanced criteria for who the advocates are. But once again, I think I'll leave that for our principal fellows to engage with and understand exactly what's required there. So at this point, before I step into some tips for developing your application, are there any front of mind questions? Jake, please go ahead.
Thanks, Camilla. I have 2 questions. One of them is with the structure of the fellowship. You said that the reflective account of practice is mainly covering those 5 areas of activity, but then the descriptor says that you need to cover values and knowledge. How are they just integrated? We're just integrating those within those areas of activity, but the areas of activity, the overarching, I guess, umbrella that they fall under?
So, yes, Jake, that's a great question. And so what happened? So your fellowship application will have almost 5 subsections, right? Each subsection will correspond to an area of activity so that okay, so under the first area of activity, you will write a narrative with a couple of examples about how you design learning experiences, because that's the first one. And you'll need to map that narrative to professional values and core areas of knowledge. So that's how those 15 things come into play.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it does. The other question I had is in one of the, I think it might be the knowledge, one of them anyway, or might be activity. One of them says that essentially when using digital technologies as a resource for learning, is a resource for learning also cover assessment?
Assessment has its own area of activity. I believe it's area of activity number 3,
because
right?
because you can have assessment for learning, so that's why it's sort of
so this is
vague.
again a very specific question. So if you're doing both, I think what you would be thinking about and talking about with your mentor as well, because we'll be pairing you up with someone who's been through this journey to support you in this space, is to really understand which examples do you use where in your application. And I'll talk about that in a little bit of in the next couple of slides, because there's really an art to making sure that the examples that you have around your practice, so it might be around digital resources that pertain to assessment, where do you use that? Is that an example for you to use in area of activity number 3? Or in fact, could it be a really nice example to use in area of activity number 4, which is about how do I support and guide my learners? So at this point, without understanding that example, I can't comment too much more, but there is an art and a craft to picking your examples. And I think our recent fellows and senior fellows will comment on, their experience of doing that. But Jake, absolutely, as you engage in this process, this is why I say, talk to your mentor, start writing, share your work with your mentor so that they can guide and advise you on how to create a really well-balanced application. And of course, the Teaching Academy supports with feedback as well to help you understand exactly that. So I hope that answers the question for now.
I think it does. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So great questions. Let's keep moving, because I do want to hand over to my guest presenters for the best part of the session. But let's just go very quickly through some reflections, I guess, and tips for developing your application. So the first thing I want to say is this fellowship application is about you and your practice. It's about your values, your beliefs, your actions, your impact. This is not about your teaching team. It's not about your curriculum. It's not about your subject, even though we work absolutely in very collaborative ways, and we're always working in parts of in teams as part of our learning and teaching and leadership practices. This application is where you have to claim and reclaim and locate yourself in this application. It's about you. So think about the story that you want to tell. This is the claim. Think about the examples that you're going to use in your application to support your claim. They have to be personal to you. So Jake, if you're writing your application, it's not about your curriculum. It's not about your subject per se. It's about what do I do and how do I do it and why do I do it? And how can I show that I'm impactful in this space? So you really have to think about the examples that you're going to provide, and you have to write in the first person. This is, you have to write in the active tense. You have to situate yourself in this application because it's a story about you and your practice. So please just be aware of that, because it's a very different genre of writing compared to some of the technical writing or the scientific writing that we might be used to as academics. What makes for a strong example? The Advanced HE Fellowship Guidelines for each of the levels gives some brilliant guidance, I guess, and ways of thinking about how you construct your narrative. But essentially, they talk about your examples need to convey what you do and how. So what do you do in teaching or supporting learning or assessment or, student support? Why do you do it that way? So what drives you as an educator? What are some of the personal kind of values and beliefs that guide what you do? So you have to talk about that. And then critically, it's not enough to say this is what I do and how. You have to say, so what? How do I know that I'm an effective educator? How do I know that I'm an effective leader? You have to be able to talk about what outcomes have resulted from your practice. So this is where you can see it's quite easy for us, I guess, to talk about what we do and how and why. But when it comes to the so what, that's where it takes time to go, oh, yes, I need to bring in evidence and examples of how my practice has been effective. Who has it been effective for, and how do I know? How has my leadership been effective for my teaching team or my course team or other people that I'm leading, and what evidence do I have to substantiate that claim that I have been effective? So this is where you need to spend a lot of time thinking about what data and evidence you will use to convey your impact. And then finally, don't forget to say, what will I do now? Now that I've done this, now that I've learned these things, now that I've engaged in this action, what are some of the things that I might do next as a consequence? So really follow this what and how, why, so what, and what now for writing your narrative. And in fact, you can use this framework or this heuristic for any kind of application you do around learning and teaching, impact and practices. It's a really useful way of thinking about your practice. Maybe coming back to what Jake was asking about, you really need to balance the breadth and depth of examples. So what I always see is that people give lots of examples. They go for breadth, but not enough depth. So depth is an example that does all of this. But often I see lots of examples that talk about the what and the how and the why, but less about the so what. So when you are thinking about your application, thinking about the various areas of activity, or you're thinking about your case study, make sure that you have the right example, the right mix, but also the breadth and the depth of those examples. There's no rule per se, but I say at the fellowship level, in a 600-word statement, you probably only have 2 to 3 examples. You can't fit any more in without sacrificing depth. So think carefully about what examples you will use and where in the fellowship application, but make sure that you're really giving that rich detail so that a reviewer can understand your impact. What are the sorts of data or evidence that we can draw on to include in our application? So you have to remember that the fellowship application doesn't let you include any attachments, any kind of appendices and so forth. It's the word count is limited to the word count, let's say at fellowship level, 3,300 words. That's all you've got to talk about your practice. So think about what student feedback or evaluation data you might have, what analytics you might have, any feedback you've got from your colleagues, and try and weave that into your application, into each of those sections to help that review panel understand this has been the impact of my practice. So for folks who are going on this journey this year, we will have some resources. We have some past applications that we can share with you. So you will kind of see how to bring in those, the data and evidence to really showcase your practice. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking because we're right on time, where it's an opportunity for you to hear from Hermie, Brian and Fiona. So both Hermie and Fiona were successful in obtaining fellowship this year. So congratulations to them. And Brian was successful in obtaining senior fellowship this year. So I'm really delighted that they've come along and they're willing to share a little of their reflections on, how that journey was for them, and in fact, what's helped them, or in fact, what's challenged them, so that you, as you start on your journey, you're very aware of kind of the experience that sits backstage So I might call on Hermie. Would you come off mute and share your perspective, please, Hermie?
Good morning. I'm trying to share my PowerPoint. Can everyone see my slides?
We can see your slides, Hermie. Thank you very much.
Okay, just maximizing on slideshow. Okay,
Perfect.
all right. Okay, thank you. So good morning again. My name is Hermie and I'm from the School of Rural Medicine. So I have 5 minutes to share my journey to the fellowship. When I applied last year was my first year in CSU after being with a previous university. So my application was a combination of my journey at my previous university and my brief journey last year at CSU. So why did I apply for fellowship? Compared to the seasoned academics in this room, I think I'm pretty much, I'd say early to mid in my career. So, but I think I really worked hard for the past few years to enrich my craft in teaching. And I wanted my efforts to be appreciated. Hence, I applied for fellowship. It's quite rewarding. It feels good to be recognized for the efforts. How much time did I spend on my application? This is Dr. From the Netflix series, The New Amsterdam Hospital. So more than anything, I think I spent heaps of time reflecting on the bad and good things I have done for the past few years. I'd say from COVID, about 2020 to 2024. So if you're able to, well, I was able to reflect. Much of my time was spent on reflecting, and that made the writing part of the narrative easier for me. So I recommend going through the framework, which Camila mentioned a while ago. Be familiarized with the framework so you'd know what to reflect on for your narrative. And after reflection, I think writing becomes easier for me. And then, of course, allocate some time to gather evidence. Go back to your SFS for the past few years and reread all those nice feedback from your students. And it actually feels good to remember how our students loved us in the past years. And of course, remember to reach out to your to the prospective writers of your supporting documents. So give them ample notice to write your referee reports. So give them a copy of your draft application. There is a guide to referees, and they will appreciate receiving a guide of that. And of course, a sample supporting statement. And of course, liaise with your mentor, feedback. I felt that I did not take advantage much of my mentor's expertise. I sent one draft to Camila, which she kindly provided feedback. But yeah, reach out to your mentor. So just what Camila mentioned a while ago, just tell a story. So I told my story. It wasn't academic writing. It was just a reflection on what I've been doing as an academic for the past few years. So my story focused on my teaching approaches and academic research work. Essentially, this is the story of my personal pedagogy. So I worked on sustainable and authentic assessments, and I worked on clinical case scenarios for the past 5 to 8 years, and using game-based platform in my teaching. So I just told my story, and these two are my favorite resources as I completed my application. And lastly, and other tips, I just have to say it again, reach out to your mentor. I sort of crammed a bit with my writing, and I think I sent Camila my draft a few days before the deadline. So take advantage of the opportunity to get feedback from your peers and from your mentor. And lastly, enjoy the process, because it's really a good time for you to reflect on why you are in this field of teaching. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hermie. I really appreciate your advice on enjoying the process. I completely agree with you. I think this is one of the few times that we will get ever to really think about why we do what we do and the so what. So really embrace it and enjoy it. And as you said, take time to understand for yourself before you start writing. That reflection piece is so important. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Brian, I might go to you next if you're happy to share a little bit about your experience of successfully applying for senior fellowship.
Thanks, Gisela, and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Brian Sangstock. As Gisela indicated, I'm an Associate Head of School in the School of Nursing, Paramedicine and Healthcare Sciences. In that role, my responsibility is primarily staff supervision and development. I no longer teach as much as I used to. So I used to teach full-time as a sessional or casual academic before moving to Charles Sturt in a continuing position. I've been here now for almost 4 years. So what I relied on for my application was very much the work that I'd done leading 3 separate disciplines across midwifery, health management and leadership, and First Nations health, and leading the staff in those disciplines from a teaching and learning perspective, as opposed to my own actual teaching. And as part of the Senior Fellowship, it is very much more about your impact on others from that leadership perspective, more so than actual teaching and learning per se. It was quite an eye-opening experience. I had done teaching reflections previously and so on, had done peer reviews of teaching, both as a peer reviewer and as the person being peer reviewed. But this takes it to a completely different level. This actually requires you to think about yourself and write it in first person, and to reflect on your experience and to contextualize where you've come from. So applying that teaching philosophy that we all have, looking at that in depth and justifying your teaching philosophy and how that impacts on where you've come from and where you're going. That in itself can be quite a challenge, but I think a beneficial challenge, because it really makes you think about how you lead staff, the way you lead them in that teaching and learning space, why we do what we do, and it gives you that theoretical underpinning to support it. Something that came back to me from my mentor was when doing the case studies, they didn't think I'd linked the case studies adequately enough to the context. I'd actually taken them too broad. So coming back and specifically linking the 2 case studies to the context, focusing on specific areas in that context and using those specific areas for the case studies. And ultimately that became beneficial because, and I know Gisela hasn't mentioned this at the moment, but you essentially get 2 attempts. So on your first attempt, if you miss, you get a resubmission. And I think they give you about 6 weeks, I think it is from memory, to resubmit. I was lucky I got through on the first attempt, and in hindsight, had I have not listened to the mentor's feedback, I probably very likely would have been in that situation where there'd be a mad scramble in about March, late March, early April, trying to get a resubmission done on top of standard workload. So I guess I was lucky that I got that feedback in a timely manner, reworked the cases, linked them more tightly with the context, and got through on the first attempt. Some other advice I was given, and this is going back almost 20 years ago now when I first started in academia, shortly after I started in higher education, start collecting evidence. If you get positive feedback from students, you get positive feedback from peers, collect that evidence, but collect it at the time when you receive it. So have a folder on your desktop on the computer and drop that nice email from colleagues into that folder. Don't leave it until you're going to apply for promotion or something like this. And then you have to go and you think, I got that nice email a little while ago, but when did I get it? Where did I put it? Having it there that you can readily access it will be really beneficial in this context, because you can then weave it into your case studies, but you've got that ready access to it, so you don't have to waste time looking for it. Be specific with your evidence. So make sure the evidence that you're using really supports what you're saying. And have a range of evidence. It might be evidence from students. It might be evidence from staff that you are leading. If you're in a position like myself, evidence that supports your leadership of staff. Or it might be from staff you've worked with over the years as well. So weaving that in. Just looking at some notes I made earlier. With your cases, pick out a specific case study. And I used an example from some research I'd done to support curriculum development and leading curriculum development around sexual and gender diversity in the healthcare curriculum. So using that, I thought that would be my strongest case study, was the development of the curriculum supporting staff to integrate sexual and gender diversity into the curriculum. So I used that as my primary case study. And the second case study I used was around a course review, a comprehensive course review that I'd led as an associate head of school and led the staff through from a First Nations perspective. So being very specific in those case studies, really pulling out what are the strengths, how does that support my impact? And remember, it has to be sustained impact over 3 to 5 years. My rationale for applying was actually because of that sustained impact, because I need to demonstrate sustained impact as part of a promotion application. And you can use the fellowship application. So if anyone is thinking about going from level A to B or B to C and so on, using your fellowship when you're successful as external demonstration of the impact you have in this field. Remembering, of course, that one of the big things with promotion is that sustained impact as well. So this gives you that external assessment of sustained impact in teaching and learning that can really support a promotion application going forward. I think the last bit of advice I'd like to give those going through the process is start writing early. Write little bits, but write often. And I know in my case, I seriously considered withdrawing the application because I felt I was running out of time. And that was simply because of workloads and everything else that was going on at the time. So my advice would be write often and write consistently, and it will change. You'll go back and change what you've written. I know that I said that was going to be the last piece of advice, but just one absolutely last piece of advice before I hand back to Kashila is make sure your referee reports, and it wasn't the case in my case, but I am aware of another case where the application was held up and the outcome was held up because the referees didn't quite comply with what was required. So making sure your referee reports are compliant with what HEA are requesting, so you don't get to the point where you have to resubmit something. I'll hand back to Kashila now.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's lots of wonderful reflections and insights that you've shared with us. I guess some of the key points that you made really is this idea that, collecting the evidence about your impact and influence, that's an ongoing process, so you made that really important point. You don't do that when you get to the point of applying for fellowship. You do that as part of your routine practice, so that when it comes to then developing a narrative for fellowship or a teaching grant or a teaching award, you've got the evidence that you need to convey the impact and the influence of your practice. So I think that was a really important point that you've made, and lots of other important points that you've made. So I hope people have been taking notes and are reflecting on the things that you've shared. Just keeping to time. Now I'm looking at the time, and our last amazing speaker is Dr. Fiona Wade from a completely different school, the School of Policing Studies. So Fiona, share with us how it was like in your journey to fellowship, and you did that last year.
Well, I did none of the, and I actually followed none of the good tips that my colleagues have just mentioned. I should have collected evidence as I was going through my career. I should have done written little bits here and there and not panicked at the last minute. So I'm going to say, do as I say and not as I did, which was mild panic, harass and harangue my referees, and just wait for it all to kind of fall down around me. I got in on time. How that happened, I still don't know. But what I would say is that I actually found it really hard. I found it hard from a number of, the biggest aspect I found hard was I found it hard to write about myself. I've been a journalist. I do creative writing. I can write anything. But when it comes down to writing about myself and putting everything in I did this and I was great at that and I did this and I had that fantastic outcome, I felt really almost quite exposed. And I had a real challenge with writing that way. So it took me a while to get into the groove of actually being able to positively write what I needed to do. What I would say is exactly what my colleagues said: be specific with your examples and link everything to, like you say, this is a really bad example, I don't do death by PowerPoint or something like that. And then in brackets, K1A3, you know, that every single thing you do links into those frameworks. And that's really, really important. I'm a peer reviewer, and I have found that actual process really helpful, and how if you look at other people's teaching and how you actually put that in a balance, I found that actually helps. So I did peer reviewing last year before I did this, and I actually found that was really quite helpful. My mentor was wonderful, fantastic, but was in a completely different discipline. So I didn't find that there was a lot of synergy between what my mentor and I could really talk about. Absolutely lovely, lovely person, and did encourage me. But I did feel that it was, and School of Policing is particularly unique. So there is not necessarily a whole range of that's, you know, the whole range. Sorry, I'm just sort of seeing something flash up. But that I found that very quite a challenge to kind of look at what he had done and what I needed to do and kind of adapt how I needed to. But that was, I mean, as I said, we're unique with our School of Policing. But having said that, teaching practice is no different wherever you are. I also found that reflecting on my own teaching practice and using the reflective process of what, so what, now what, I actually found that really quite beneficial. Looking back on it now, I can see that it was really quite beneficial. I mean, I've been teaching, I think, roughly 15 years on and off, and at the higher education level, and looking at how my own teaching practice has evolved was actually quite insightful, but I still found it really hard to put on paper. And I would just, life gets in the way of nearly everything under the sun. Just put some time away and get it done. I regret in some ways that I had to do it at such a last minute, and also I feel very badly for my referees who I had to kind of camp outside their offices and you know, threaten them with all sorts of things if it didn't. I didn't threaten them really, but it was a case of, if you're going to do it, put some time aside if you can and get it done, because it will, if you put it on the back burner, it has a habit of running away with you. Time has a habit of running away, and yes, I think it's a wonderful one. People say, why did I do it? I have taught at universities overseas, and I do intend to go back overseas and teach. More and more universities in the international arena are asking for fellowship for application. And for me, I think this was a no-brainer. So thank you very much. And I hope that I have given a little bit of an insight, but I think the number one thing is just don't do what I did.
Fiona, thank you for sharing your reflections. And I think the thing that I took away from you is just the acknowledgement of how difficult this process can be. I absolutely resonate with you. I felt this sense of imposter syndrome when I was writing my application. And by the way, I also got a request for resubmission. So, you know, it's a difficult process. So I really struggled with thinking about my leadership practices. I was going for senior fellowship in 2022, and I questioned my practice. I questioned my impact. It was actually quite a confrontational experience, I think, in many ways. And you've spoken so eloquently to the challenges we can experience when we're deep diving and thinking about our practice at that level. So I absolutely I think you've made that point very clearly, that this can be a troublesome, difficult journey in that way as well. But I think what I want to share with the group here is, conversely, through doing the fellowship process, through my resubmission, what I gained was this new appreciation for my leadership practices. I sort of started to see myself as a leader as a consequence of that. And in fact, one of the things that was really powerful for me was looking at my referee reports and seeing how they talked about me and my leadership. And I thought, oh, wow, like those are amazing words. And that reinforced and validated how I felt, and really, I guess, gave me the confidence to say, I own this, and this is, this is my practice. So one of the tips I can share with you as well is that, talk to your referees, coach them. Like Brian said, you need to do some coaching with them so that they understand the expectation that they're what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to produce. But in that, when you get your referee statements back, read them in depth and see how they talk about your practice, and see whether you can find some really powerful, impactful words that your referees have used, and compare how they talk about your practice versus how you've talked about your practice. I certainly found that I looked at the referee statements, and I was able to borrow some better words to use to talk about my practice. So in fact, after I got my referee statements, it helped me to really think a bit more strategically about my leadership practice. So there are lots of things that you can do along the way to keep deepening your case studies, to keep deepening your writing, and making sure that it really captures the breadth of your impact and your practice as an educator and as an educational leader. So let's go to some final tips, and then we'll open up for questions. Please follow the rules that they set out for you. They're very prescriptive in the sense of you are not allowed to submit additional documentation. It has to be a plain application, in the sense of you're not allowed to use any images or diagrams or other things in your application. No special formatting, because you fill the application online. So even though you download the template and work on it in as a Word document, you are required to fill the application out online. So you can't, they've set the word limits, they don't allow for you to include attachments. So you've got to really think about writing it in a way that is that's going to fit into that online portal, because you don't want to be doing things at the last minute while you're in the portal trying to make things work. So observe the word limits, because the system won't let you go over. So just those things make you really stick to the expectations, I guess, of Advanced HE around what this application looks like. And here's a new one. Use Bing Copilot as your personal writing assistant. We've got this amazing tool at our fingertips, right? I certainly didn't use it in my own journey, but now I use it for a lot of things. I found it really difficult to map the professional standard framework and the values and the knowledge and the core activities to my case studies and reflective account of practice. If I was going to go for fellowship again, I would use Copilot to help me do the mapping. Absolutely, 100%. I would use it for that activity because there's a bit of, and I think Jake, you drew this out. There's a lot of quite detailed work you need to do the mapping. If you're finding it difficult to write in that first person, if you're finding it difficult to kind of talk about your practice and situate yourself in it, use Copilot to give you some ideas of how you can really refine and clarify your writing. It's fantastic for that. I know that a lot of people, especially those in the science fields, talk about needing to step out of the scientific mindset in order to write these applications. You've got a system there who can partner with you to support you in that space. So it can help you use a more active tone. I find that a lot of feedback I give is about how passive the application and the writing is. So it can help you situate yourself more actively in the application and help you write in the first person. And then, of course, if, I talked about the idea of the depth of study, so you can use Copilot once again to help you really craft a case study or an example that addresses all those elements of the what and the how, the why, the so what, and the what now. So, we know that Gen AI is often talked about in terms of being the most annoying, eager, enthusiastic assistant that you will meet. Think about a research assistant or a undergraduate sort of teaching assistant. They will get things wrong. They might not often get the point, but they're a wonderful resource to have. And I think it's about using a tool at your disposal that you can kind of use in this space to craft the writing, because as I say, it's a very different genre of writing. And I think we all need some all the support that we can get in this space. So have a go and have a play in Bing Copilot and see how that goes for you. So again, a very quick note. So for those who are faculty funded this year, congratulations to you. If you've been successful, we will be allocating you a mentor in the week commencing the 12th of May, which is next week. We will be adding you to an applicants team chat. That's a space for us to share information with you, but it's also a space for you to share information with each other, share the kind of the highs and the lows and everything else, any reflections that you have as you engage in the process. It's a place for you to ask questions and so forth. We do expect that you submit a draft to your mentor for feedback, but that I would highly recommend that if you are planned and you put the time in, a draft should come to the Teaching Academy so that we can cast our eyes on that. I would only ever look at one case study, or I would only look at sort of a couple of your areas of activity. But by the time I have reflected and looked at that, I can give you feedback on how to strengthen the other areas of your application. So do make sure that in your timeline you are putting in those feedback touch points as well. Really, really important. I think all of our applicants, our successful applicants, have talked about that. And you are expected to submit your application before the end of 2025, as the funding is not going to be carried forward. And for anyone else on this call who is not faculty funded, but is funded through the divisions, for example, who you might be self-funding this year, if you would like to be connected to us, if you would like to be connected to the applicant group, please reach out to the Teaching Academy and let us know. All right, so at this point we have 5 minutes, but I'd like to take any questions. I can see Lisa is typing. Lisa, do you have a question that you want to come off mute and ask?
Hi, I just wanted to check if there was a schedule of progress dates for actions to be completed, like for certain stages, rather than kind of us all crashing at the end, crashing into the end of, you know, this is the final deadline, get it in sort of thing, just to make life easier for, I'm thinking particularly of the mentors.
It is the schedule. Well, the end date is sort of, 31st December, your application has to be in by then. I think in the guidelines that we have shared online as part of the EOI process, there was some key dates in there. So for anyone going through and applying this year, please keep those guidelines handy, because it does have some dates that talk about, when you should be expecting to hand things to the Teaching Academy for feedback, for example. In terms of how you and your mentor work and the timelines in that space, that's for you and your mentor and your other supporters to kind of work out in terms of when your referees should be handing in their statements. Once again, it's a very personalized kind of relationship. So I think I would leave that for you to work out with your referees and your mentors. But certainly from my perspective, the sooner the better for me to see a draft. And because then once I've looked at that draft, given the feedback, I can feel confident that you are now going to go off and apply the same feedback to the other areas of your application. So earlier the better from my perspective in terms of feedback, but everything else you've got to kind of craft timelines that work for you and for the people that you're working with in the mentorship space.
I'm not sure if we covered this. I'm not, but in terms of the evidence that is meant to support the applications, how current does that evidence need to be? I noted that Brian said, very relevantly that we should be building up, obviously, a folder or a file from, of feedback, but sometimes that can get a bit dated. So should it be, feedback from the past 12 months, the past 18 months, how far back? And I know that can vary depending on the type of fellowship you're applying for.
Yeah, and so if you're going for fellowship, for example, it's the last 3 years. If you're going for senior fellowship, between 3 to 5 years. And if you're going, obviously, for principal fellowship, it is. So it's not just about currency of feedback, it's about showing sustained activity. So they want to see, say, at level of senior fellowship, that you've been leading and you've been influencing others over the last 3 to 5 years. So you must make sure your examples are not all just from, say, 2025 or 2024. That's not going to get you across the line. You have to show that there's sustained activity over that period of time as relevant to your level of fellowship. So if you're going for fellowship, then you want to make sure there's a good mix of examples across the last 3 years. Jake?
Yeah, this is not a question, but a comment. Because I know that it pertains to a couple of people here. I previously had a lot of trouble sort of talking about myself and doing this sort of practice, but I would have to say that since sitting the graduate certificate, higher education, learning and teaching, a lot of the content in there and a lot of the assessments really support that style of writing, and it helps you to really look at the academic literature and form a bit of a narrative around that. So I just wanted, because I know this is recorded and that there are people here that teach into that, I just wanted to say that without that, it probably would have been near impossible for me to attempt this at this point in time. So
thank you, Jake, for that shout out. I know Kelly is smiling very broadly, as am I, because we like hearing such positive feedback and about the grad cert. And actually everything we do in the Teaching Academy is very much geared to support practitioners from any discipline, right, to engage in this kind of narrative construction, because like I said, it's a very different genre of writing. We're not trained to do this unless you happen to be from this, maybe the social sciences or arts and ed. There's a bit more of an exposure, but for most of us, this is quite a new way of writing. And so a lot of the work that we do in the Teaching Academy, Foundations of Learning and Teaching, our new probation program, peer review. I think, Fiona, you talked about how that was a really powerful learning experience in terms of seeing how other people write about their practice, the grad cert. We try our best to support everyone, our learning and teaching community, to kind of engage with this style of talking about your practice. Fiona, any comments from you?
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that something I should have said before is that with examples, one of the things that I did from memory was that I used an example to highlight certain capabilities and linked into the framework. And then I further use that same example to link into other capabilities. So you can use the one example and delve into it in different parts, if that makes sense. And so you can then kind of like, if that makes any, you can use this, for example, your teaching practice allowed you to do this and link that to the frameworks, and then also allowed you to do this, and this. So you can kind of broaden the examples out to cover more of the frameworks. That's what I meant to say before.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fiona. And absolutely, there's an art and a craft to this, which is why for some, including myself, it was more than a 12-month journey. So, it is tough. I'm not going to say it isn't, to say that by December that you'll have this application ready to go. But that is obviously, it's a great opportunity, to be supported through the university in this way. So please make the most of it. You will have some amazing mentors who will be there to support you and be your cheerleaders, as will we in the Teaching Academy. So don't hesitate to reach out to us and have those conversations if you feel like you need further advice or information. I have, of course, shared with you, you need to go away and make sure that you request an information pack from Advance HE, which aligned to your level of fellowship, and that has everything you need. So start there. Just get that information and sit with it for a little while, then use that to start reflecting on the story that you want to tell. So I know it's gone just over time and a few people have had to leave, but are there any final questions before we bring the session to a close? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, for such active involvement in the session. I hope you have found it valuable to hear from Hermie, Brian, and Fiona about their journey and kind of setting yourself up for success. We in the Teaching Academy will obviously support you along this journey. So reach out to us at any time if you want to think about what fellowship might look like for you, whether you're on this journey right now this year or whether that's something that you're aiming for in the next couple of years. I'm always happy to chat to you about anything to do with fellowship. So good luck for those who are starting on the journey. We will be in touch with mentor information and so forth. For anyone else who's here because they're curious and they're thinking about what is fellowship right for me? Well, I think the answer is yes. But it is something. It is a huge commitment. It takes quite a commitment to really reflect on your practice this way. So really think about who your supporters are that can guide you and advise you in this space. Thank you all for being here. And we shall no doubt I'll see many of you in various other sessions across the year. Thank you, Brian, Hermie, and Fiona, for your wonderful and participation, contribution, and generosity, I think, in supporting our future fellows. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.